From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
This budget will be a public safety and national security budget, and it will include a historic increase in defense spending to rebuild the depleted military of the United States of America at a time we most need it.
Is heading to Capitol Hill tonight as he seeks a 10% increase in Pentagon spending while slashing the budget of other agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency. We'll look back at a largely forgotten period in U.S. history when more than 1 million, possibly 2 million people were deported to Mexico in the 1930s. By some estimates, 60% of those deported were U.S. citizens.
It was an injustice what they've done to us, being American citizens, for them to send us to Mexico when we weren't Mexicans.
We'll speak with Chicano Studies professor Francisco Valderrama, co-author of the landmark book Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in the 1930s. And we'll be joined by Muhammad Ali's son and ex-wife. When they recently flew back into the country from Jamaica, immigration authorities asked them if they were Muslim. When Muhammad Ali Jr. said yes, authorities detained and questioned him and his mother for 2 hours. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump's headed to Capitol Hill tonight for his first presidential address to Congress, where he's expected to lay out part of his budget plan. On Monday, Trump proposed increasing the military budget to just over $600 billion, a $54 billion increase, while deeply slashing the budgets of other agencies, like the Environmental Protection Agency and the State Department. Separately, President Trump is also expected to sign an executive order today aimed at reversing President Obama's clean water regulation, known as the Waters of the United States rule. The regulation covers 60% of the U.S.'s bodies of water and seeks to protect the waters from pollution. The executive order is expected to direct the Environmental Protection Agency and other federal agencies to review this regulation and revise or rescind parts of it that do not promote economic growth. The Senate has confirmed billionaire Wilbur Ross as Commerce Secretary in a 72-27 vote Monday. Ross is worth an estimated $2.9 billion. He's one of the richest people ever to hold public office. This is Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren speaking out against Ross's confirmation on Monday.
Mr. Ross is a Wall Street billionaire with a long history of profiting from the suffering of others. He also has shady ties to Vladimir Putin's Russia. This is not normal. And it is shameful if we ignore all of it as we evaluate the president's nominees to critical foreign policy and national security jobs.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and others are mocking President Trump after Trump told a room full of governors that nobody knew replacing the Affordable Care Act would be so complicated.
Now, I have to tell you, it's an unbelievably complex subject. Nobody knew that health care could be so complicated.
Senator Sanders responded on CNN.
Well, some of us who were sitting on the Health Education Committee who went to meeting after meeting after meeting, who heard from dozens of people who stayed up night after night trying to figure out this thing. Yeah, we got a clue. When you provide health care in a nation of 320 million people, yeah, it is very, very complicated.
President Trump has accused his predecessor, President Obama, of being behind a series of leaks coming out of the White House. During Monday's taped interview on Fox and Friends, Trump also accused Obama of being behind the mass protests at the Republican town halls.
Well, I think he is behind it. I also think it's politics. That's the way it is. And look, I have a very
Bush was never. Agenda. Bush wasn't going after Clinton. Clinton was going after Bush.
Well, you never know what's exactly happening behind the scenes. You know, you're probably right or possibly right, but you never know. No, I think that President Obama is behind it because his people are certainly behind it. And some of the leaks possibly come from that group. You know, some of the leaks, which are really very serious leaks because they're very bad in terms of national security. But I also understand that's politics, and in terms of him being behind things, that's politics, and it will probably continue.
That's President Trump accusing former President Obama of being behind the leaks coming out of the White House. Yet White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer seems to believe his own staff are behind the leaks, and he recently forced them to submit to a random phone check, according to Politico, checking to see if they were communicating with reporters. Former President George W. Bush criticized President Trump's war on the media in an interview Monday with the Today Show host Matt Lauer.
Did you ever consider the media to be the enemy of the American people?
I consider the media to be indispensable to democracy. That we need an independent media to hold people like me to account. I mean, power can be very addictive, and it can be corrosive, and it's important for the media to call to account people who abuse their power, whether it be here or elsewhere.
During the interview, Today Show host Matt Lauer also asked former President George W. Bush about Trump's Muslim travel ban, which temporarily blocked people from 7 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States before the ban was suspended by the courts earlier this month.
Just want to make sure I understand. You for or against the ban? You're against the ban?
I am for an immigration policy that's welcoming and that upholds the law.
President Trump is expected to unveil a new version of the travel ban any day now. Jewish schools and community centers in 11 states were hit by another wave of bomb threats Monday. It marks the 5th wave of threats against JCCs and Jewish schools nationwide over the past 2 months. At least 2 Jewish cemeteries have also been desecrated in recent weeks. Over the weekend, as many as 500 grave sites at a Jewish cemetery in Philadelphia were toppled or damaged. While President Trump issued a statement last week decrying the bomb threats after enormous pressure, many say his administration has fostered a culture of hate against Jews as well as Muslims that has contributed to the rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic attacks nationwide. Trump's Justice Department has dropped part of its legal objection to Texas's strict voter ID law, which appeals courts have ruled illegally discriminates against blacks and Latinos and violates the Voting Rights Act. Obama's Justice Department had sued Texas as part of an ongoing lawsuit against Texas's 2011 law, which created a list of IDs required to vote that skewed heavily toward IDs carried by whites, such as concealed carry permits, while excluding IDs often carried by people of color, such as government employee IDs and public university IDs. Obama's Justice Department claimed Texas had a discriminatory intent in enacting the law, but under the direction of Trump's new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, the Justice Department has now dropped the discriminatory intent claim. Sessions has long opposed the Voting Rights Act, and major civil rights groups, including the NAACP, had protested his confirmation as Attorney General. House Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes says he hasn't found enough evidence of communications between President Trump's associates and Russian officials to justify appointing a special prosecutor to investigate, even though there hasn't been an investigation, in order to obtain that evidence. Instead, Nunes is trying to shift focus onto the leaks coming out of the White House, calling them major crimes. Nunes' stance puts him at odds with other Republican lawmakers, including former House Oversight and Government Reform Chair Darrell Issa, who on Monday called for an independent investigation. A new investigation by The Guardian has revealed that leaked court documents allege Honduran environmental activist Berta Cáceres' murder nearly a year ago was planned by Honduran military intelligence members who are linked to the country's U.S.-trained special forces. Cáceres was murdered by armed gunmen just before midnight, March 2, 2016. At the time of her murder, she was fighting hydroelectric dams threatening the ancestral land of the indigenous Lenca people. The Guardian investigation published today reveals at least 2 men who have been arrested in connection with Cáceres' murder, Mariano Diaz and Douglas Giovanni Bustillo, received military training in the United States. Honduran prosecutors say phone records reveal extensive communication between Diaz, Bustillo, and a former Honduran Special Forces sniper who's also been charged in the murder. Prosecutors say this man, Henry Javier Hernandez, may have also worked as an informant for the Honduran military intelligence. Prosecutors say one of the messages between the 3 men even includes a coded reference to a payment for an extrajudicial killing. In Iraq, the U.S.-backed Iraqi army says it's recaptured a key bridge in western Mosul amidst an ongoing campaign to retake this side of the city from ISIS militants. Humanitarian aid organizations have issued dire warnings about the safety of the 750,000 people living in West Mosul. The campaign comes as a report issued this month by the Institute for Study of War is already warning that another post-ISIS insurgency is already forming in Iraq. The report reads, quote, early indicators suggest that a post-ISIS Sunni insurgency may be forming in Iraq, and al-Qaeda is trying to gain traction within it. The U.S.-backed coalition has been focused only on eliminating ISIS, not other insurgent groups or the conditions that grow them, unquote. Unnamed U.S. officials, as well as monitoring groups like the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, say a top al-Qaeda leader has been killed by a missile strike in Idlib, Syria. Abu Akhar al-Masri was reportedly killed Sunday in an attack that unnamed U.S. officials say was directed by U.S. intelligence agencies. In separate attacks, opposition activists say as many as 11 people were killed Monday night in airstrikes against rebel-held Idlib. The strikes came as another round of talks continue in Geneva, aimed at ending the ongoing Syrian civil war. Back in the United States and Kansas, a white man who's accused of opening fire on 2 Indian men last week, killing one, appeared in court Monday via video link on charges of first-degree murder and first-degree attempted murder. Adam Purinton is accused of killing Srinivas Kuchabatla and wounding Alak Madasani last Wednesday after he reportedly yelled, "Get out of my country," and then opened fire. New reports suggest Purinton believed the 2 Indian men were Iranian. A bartender at an Applebee's where Purinton went after the shooting told a 911 dispatcher that Purinton said he, quote, shot and killed 2 Iranian people, unquote. Authorities have not yet said whether they are investigating the murder as a hate crime. At least 2 black transgender women have been murdered in New Orleans in recent days. On Monday, police say Ciara McKelvin was stabbed to death only 2 days after 33-year-old Chena Gibson was fatally shot outside a shopping center. They're the 5th and 6th reported murders of transgender women this year. Earlier this month, 24-year-old Kiki Colliers was killed in Chicago, and 23-year-old JoJo Stryker was murdered in Toledo, Ohio. And for the first time in the 130-year history of the Harvard Law Review, its president is a black woman. 24-year-old Ameme Umana, the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, was elected as the president of the United States' most prestigious law review. She was elected at the end of January. It's the most powerful student position at Harvard Law School. Among others who've occupied that position was former President Barack Obama. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. President Trump is heading to Capitol Hill tonight and is expected to outline part of his budget plan before a joint session of Congress. On Monday, Trump proposed increasing the military budget to just over $600 billion, nearly 10% increase, while deeply slashing the budgets of other agencies, likely including the Environmental Protection Agency and the State Department. Trump said he wanted historic increase in military spending.
This budget will be a public safety and national security budget, very much based on those two, with plenty of other things, but very strong. And it will include a historic increase in defense spending to rebuild the depleted military of the United States of America at a time we most need it. This is a landmark event, a message to the world in these dangerous times of American strength, security, and resolve. We must ensure that our courageous servicemen and women have the tools they need to deter war, and when called upon to fight in our name, only do one thing: win. We have to win. We have to start winning wars again.
Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California responded on Twitter by writing, quote, President Trump's morally bankrupt budget will funnel more money to the Pentagon at the expense of the poor and our planet. This is an awful idea. The United States already has by far the largest military budget in the world. According to the National Priorities Project, the Pentagon's annual budget is roughly the size of the world's next 7 largest military budgets combined.
Meanwhile, some Republicans in Congress, including Senator John McCain, are criticizing Trump for not seeking even more money for the military. We go now to Boston, where we're joined by Nita Crawford, co-director of the Cost of War Project, professor of political science at Boston University. In September, she released a report that found the United States has spent nearly $5 trillion since the September 11, 2001 attacks on Homeland Security and the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Pakistan. Professor Crawford, welcome welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about what President Trump himself is calling this historic increase that he's asking for the military, a 10% increase?
Well, it is historic. There has been no increase of this magnitude in peacetime or, in fact, since 2002, when the United States was running up for the Iraq War, so in recent war memory. This is unprecedented in a sense.
And your response to it?
Well, look, there is no grand strategy here. It's unclear to what purpose all of this money will be put. And anyone who calls for even more spending, I think, is missing the point. The United States has this year a military budget of $583 billion. Adding $54 billion will take us well into the $600 billion a year. Absent a grand strategy for this increase, what is it to be spent on? It will just, in fact, hurt the United States domestically and abroad, I think make us more insecure.
And Professor Crawford, the way that Trump has explained it, he's looking for increases in all the branches of the military, and in addition in missile capacity. So we're talking about this is not a strategic planned increase in what we think may be a critical portion of the United States military. It's just an overall increase, isn't it?
Right. Well, he's going to increase the nuclear arsenal, increase the capacity of it to make more flexible nuclear wars, if that were possible. He's going to increase the size of the Army, increase the size of the Marines, and increase the surface and submarine force of the United States Navy. The United States already has more than a dozen aircraft carriers, many submarines. We don't really need to increase the size of the Navy. It can do what it needs to do, but it's unclear what it needs to do. There is no larger picture here other than more is better. That isn't, to me, a plan. And in fact, the United States could decrease its military spending by 10%, 20%, in fact, and be just as safe, probably more safe.
Isn't this, in effect, an increased militarization of the society? Because the president is also proposing a 10,000 increase in Border Patrol agents. It almost seems he's basically redirecting much of the budget into militarizing American society.
Well, it's already the case that more than half of all discretionary spending is spent on the military. Right, so this will increase the proportion of all discretionary spending that goes toward armed forces. Then when you add the increased budget to Homeland Security, to Border Patrol, it is, in fact, you're right, a militarization of the United States domestically as well. And you see this when you go out to places on the border, or, for instance, most recently where I was in Standing Rock, that surplus military equipment is deployed at home. Now, we will have more surplus military equipment because what will happen is that the United States military will buy new things, and they'll have a desire to get rid of that surplus so they don't have to store it and maintain it. They'll give it to the police and Border Patrol and to other countries, which will, in fact, we'll see that military equipment again abroad. And we've also seen how devastating using military equipment designed for war at home can be.
Speaking to the National Governors Association on Monday, President Trump criticized U.S. military spending in the Middle East.
I saw a chart the other day, as of about a month ago, $6 trillion we've spent in the Middle East. $6 trillion. And I want to tell you, that's just unacceptable. And we're nowhere. Actually, if you think about it, we're less than nowhere. The Middle East is far worse than it was 16, 17 years ago. There's not even a contest. So we've spent $6 trillion. We have a hornet's nest. It's a mess like you've never seen before. We're nowhere. So we're going to straighten it out.
So that's President Trump citing your figures, Professor Crawford, from the Cost of War Project. Your response?
Well, he doesn't quite have it right, but it would take too long to correct him. But the gist of it is, yes, we've spent a great deal of money in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other parts of the world, including Yemen, making war. And what he does have right is we're not much better off, and in fact, in many ways, we're worse off. In Afghanistan, the government controls less territory now than it did a year ago, and it controlled less territory a year ago than it did the year before that. The number of Taliban and other insurgents in Afghanistan has, in fact, grown since they diminished the number of those forces in the mid-2000s. So it's about 40,000 people that are estimated to be in those movements. So you can't kill everybody, in other words, and expect that to work, because people don't like being pushed around and bullied. So his argument, it's the assumption that we spend more money than we've already spent and it's going to get better, I think, is on the face of it illogical without a plan. There's no plan. It's just throw money. And the worst part about this, if you think about it, is we're committing ourselves then to not just spending an extra $54 billion this year, but because of the way the budget works, we're committing ourselves, if we buy big weapons and increase the number of people in the military, to spending year after year that amount. You just don't spend it 1 year. You make commitments to buy weapons, and that takes time. And you make commitments to people to provide for their health care, and that doesn't go away after a year. And so we're committing huge amounts of spending for what? There's no plan for decades.
Well, Professor Crawford, the $54 billion increase also is going to be create a $54 billion reduction in the expenditures for other agencies. The impact of such a large reduction on non-military spending, discretionary spending of the government.
Well, just think of two domestically. The first, of course, is that we have urgent priorities at home. That each $1 million spent on the military, not to mention the billions, actually produces fewer jobs per dollar than non-military spending. That's been clear for decades, and it actually, again, is illogical to think that this is going to help the United States domestically. Secondly, I think it's obvious that the militarization of the budget means that not just jobs are lost, but opportunities are lost in the future to do important work. Then there are international consequences for such increases in spending and a corresponding decrease in, let's say, environmental protection. As the climate gets worse, unrest grows. Then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that there's great unrest in the world. As we decrease spending on diplomacy, the things where the United States could make a positive difference through diplomacy, that is not war, diminish because it's already been underemphasized. The last several secretaries of defense have asked the United States to increase money on climate and on diplomacy, the State Department. They've wanted just the opposite of what this government is
and
proposing.
And, of course, President Trump has just said that they're going to vastly decrease the budget for the State Department. As Reuters reports, more than 120 retired U.S. generals and admirals urged Congress Monday to fully fund U.S. diplomacy and foreign aid, saying elevating and strengthening diplomacy and development alongside defense are critical to keeping America safe. I wanted to ask you, lastly, Professor Crawford, about President Trump calling for a new nuclear arms race.
Again, what for? The United States already has several thousand nuclear weapons ready to be deployed, that is used against adversaries. These weapons are capable of destroying much of the planet, right? There's no reason, in fact, to develop more accurate or more easily used nuclear options other than the quest to maintain superiority. But we're already superior. What it does, in fact, is increase the incentive for our adversaries to increase the quality and the quantity of their nuclear forces. It's absurd.
We want to thank you so much for joining us, Professor Nita Crawford, co-director of the Costs of War Project, professor of political science at Boston University. And we will link to your study at Democracy Now! When we come back, we have two segments. Later in the broadcast, we'll be speaking with the son of Muhammad Ali Jr. From the United States, went out of the country for Black History Month. When he came back, he was stopped at the airport, questioned about his religion, Muslim. But first, we're going to look back in history at a time that many are deeply concerned might be a harbinger of what is to come. Stay with us.
The crops are all in and the lettuce is rotting. The oranges are piled in their creosote dumps. They're flying them back to that Mexican border to pay all their money and wade back again. My father's own father, he waded that river. They took all the money he made in his life. My brothers and sisters came working the fruit trees. They rode on that truck till they lay down and died.
Deportee, this version sung by Joan Baez. The song was written by Woody Guthrie about a crash that killed 32 people, most of them migrant farm workers who are being deported from California to Mexico. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
President Donald Trump is slated to give his first presidential address to Congress today. Democratic lawmakers have begun giving their tickets away to immigrants as a protest against Trump's push to increase deportations and to block residents from some Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States. Last week, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said Trump wants to, quote, take the shackles off of the nation's immigration agents.
The president wanted to take the shackles off individuals in these agencies and say, you have a mission. There are laws that need to be followed. You should do your mission and follow the law.
Last Thursday, President Trump called his deportation plans a military operation during a meeting with manufacturing CEOs.
You see what's happening at the border. All of a sudden, for the first time, we're getting gang members out. We're getting drug lords out. We're getting really bad dudes out of this country, and at a rate that nobody's ever seen before. And they're the bad ones. And it's a military operation because what has been allowed to come into our country, when you see gang violence that you've read about like never before and all of the things, much of that is people that are here illegally. And they're rough and they're tough, but they're not tough like our people. So we're getting them out.
Well, this is not the first time people of Mexican descent have been demonized, accused of stealing jobs, and forced to leave the country. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, more than 1 million people residing in the United States were deported to Mexico. Some estimate as much as 60% of them were U.S. citizens of Mexican descent.
In 2003, then California State Senator Joe Dunn held hearings in Sacramento where survivors gave testimony about what happened to them during the forced expulsions, which the government called repatriations. This is Senator Dunn stressing the importance of the hearing.
The idea from which this nation was born was the promise to all of liberty and justice. Today, we examine a tragic part of American history where we betrayed the justice part of that promise. And a betrayal that affected a staggering number of individuals. By some estimates, almost 2 million individuals were deported from the United States in the 1930s. Some estimate that almost 60% of those that were deported were United States citizens. And they were deported for but one reason. They just happened to be of Mexican descent.
The state of California went on to issue a formal apology for its role in the expulsions and built a memorial in downtown Los Angeles to commemorate the victims. But many fear that history is now on the verge or repeating itself already. For more, we're going to Los Angeles, California, where we're joined by the preeminent scholar on this often overlooked chapter of American history, Francisco Balderrama, professor of American history and Chicano studies at California State University, Los Angeles. He's the co-author of the book Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in the 1930s. Professor Balderrama, thank you so much for joining us. I think for many, especially young people, but I'm sure many more, do not know this chapter of American history. Can you lay it out for us, what actually happened?
You're right that it's largely not known, and that's in the larger American society, the Mexican nation, as well as in the Mexican community itself. That this occurred during the Great Depression, a period of vast unemployment and underemployment, that at least over 1 million. Joe Dunn thinks in terms of maybe almost 2 million individuals, Mexican nationals and American citizens of Mexican descent were swept up and expelled out of this country. And it covered the entire United States, from Alabama and Mississippi to Alaska, from Los Angeles to New York. This mass expulsion occurred. And of a population that included Mexican nationals, many of them that had lived in this country 20, 30 years. But increasingly important is the 60% or more of American citizens of Mexican descent. In other words, what occurred here was unconstitutional deportation.
Well, Professor Balderrama, I'm wondering if you could talk also about the role of the press at that time in stirring up anti-immigrant fervor, because this began during the Hoover administration and then moved on into the Roosevelt administration. What was the role of the press as well?
Well, the role of the press is significant, but it's also reflecting the larger American society at this time as well. The key notion that the press puts forward is that a Mexican is a Mexican. There is no distinction in terms of residents in this country. As I mentioned earlier, many of them had lived in this country 20, 25 years. Most of them were documented. Most of them had papers. And that their children that were born in this country were U.S. citizens. No distinctions made. And that is accepted in this society and serves as a way of looking at the population that even though they had contributed during better times to the economic prosperity of the United States, that now that's not recognized. They are the other, so to speak.
I want to turn to Ignacio Pina, who lived in rural Idaho when sheriffs came to his house and took everybody in custody in the summer of 1931. His parents had lived in the United States for some 25 years. He was about to enter first grade. We're taking this from a film called A Forgotten Injustice. A now elderly Pena describes what happened that day.
My mother was cooking and hand-making flour tortillas. I remember we were eating them with melted butter. Then all of a sudden they arrived. They pointed their guns at us. One officer was standing outside, the other one was inside, and they said, "Come on, let's go, come on." And my mother would ask, "Where?" "No questions, come on, out."
No questions, come on, out.
They took us to the fields where my father was working. They grabbed him too, and then they filled up the other car with Mexicans that were working there as well. In Pocatello, Idaho, they put us in jail. We were in jail for 6 or 7 days. I was 6 years old, and as a kid I could not understand why we were in jail if we were not criminals. My father was in one cell and my mother was in another, one with me, my 3 sisters, and my 2 brothers. But I could not understand why. Even when we were in the train on our way to El Paso, Texas, I wondered, where is this train going? What's going to happen with us? There were about 5 cars with lots of Mexicans, lots of families. We were so young, but I remember looking around at the people. They looked so sad. Because many were suffering the same things we were facing. They were kicked out too. They did it so we couldn't come back, even the ones that were born here like us. They didn't let us take anything with us, not even our birth certificates.
Not even our birth certificates. That was Ignacio Pena. Professor Balderrama, you knew Ignacio Pena. Can you tell us more about this story and how typical it was?
Well, Mr. Pena called me after we had the hearings in Sacramento. We conducted extensive interviews, and getting to meet his family, his son shared with me that he no longer has the nightmares that this man was experiencing well into his 80s because he was able to share his story with us. Mr. Pena, who's recently deceased, became an activist in regards of the Apology Act and the erection of the memorial here in Los Angeles. And I think it shows that an individual that suffered with this throughout his life, that even had nightmares as a senior citizen about that, became an activist and shared that story multiple times to the press, to the television, on, with the conviction that, as many of the other survivors, that this not happen to anybody else. When he said that, and the other survivors, not to happen to anybody else, he just doesn't mean people of Mexican descent or Latino descent. Rather, what he's saying is anybody else, and especially those that are American citizens. It shouldn't happen. We should not have unconstitutional deportation.
And Professor Balderrama, you've specialized in the mass deportations of the 1930s, but that was not the last of these deportations, right? In the 1950s, there was Operation Wetback under the Eisenhower administration, and of course, during the Bush years and into the Obama years, there were the mass deportations that occurred. It seems every time there is an economic crisis in the United States, the first reflex is to start mass deportations of the other as the society begins to declare them.
Exactly, Juan. You're right on target with that we do have these cycles. What behooves American society to understand is that this early period that I've studied, the early 20th century, and the Great Depression, which is the most severe economic crisis of the 20th and the 21st century, is the fact that at that time develops this ideology, this set of beliefs, this way of thinking of the Mexican Latino population, that somehow they're not part of our society, that they are, many of them are criminals, many of them are here to be on welfare, that somehow, some way they cannot become part of our society. And I think what is especially important to keep in mind for your listeners is that as we experience the nightmare of today, the crisis of today, which is different, that same ideology, that same way of thinking is still in action today.
I wanted to go, Professor Balderrama, to your late co-author, Raymond Rodriguez. This is Rodriguez speaking at the 2003 Select Committee on Citizen Participation at the California State Senate.
My dad left in 1936. When I was 10, I never saw my dad again. How is anybody going to compensate me for that loss?
That was Raymond Rodriguez, your co-author. Can you tell us about him and his family's experience, and also why just Mexicans? Was it only Mexicans?
Well,
because 60% of them perhaps were American.
Not only my colleague. Raymond Rodriguez was a very, very dear friend. We spoke with one voice when we wrote Decade of Betrayal, and in countless venues we spoke with one voice in terms of this particular issue. I had known Ray for some 20 years at the time that we completed the first edition of Decade of Betrayal, and at that moment I learned that his father had been a repatriate. At that moment when the book was finished and we were submitting it to the publisher, I knew they had grown up with a single parent, with a mother only, but I didn't know what had happened to his father. So in a lot of ways, my co-author, my treasured friend, his work together, his scholarship, as well as his activism, was trying to uncover that history, his own family history. And we see that thread among others as well. Many other individuals who, in understanding this issue, from reading Decade of Betrayal, from hearing your radio program, from looking at this and understanding this, have developed a larger understanding. What we have seen happen is that this private history has now become a public history. And many people, as they deal with this trying to become a public history, that even though Ray, in the excerpt that you just played, was the very first time that publicly he announced that his father had been a repatriate, that what had happened had divided his family. His mother and his siblings stayed here in the United States, and his father returned to Mexico, and he never saw his father again.
Well, and Professor Balderrama, this whole issue of repatriation, the United States government labeled it repatriation because it claimed that the people were voluntarily agreeing to go back to their home country. But as you know, as you've reported, and as happens right here in the United States now, people are picked up, locked up, and then told, if you don't want to stay locked up, then you agree to self-deport, to in essence leave the country and go back to your home country. So it's really a choice of staying in jail or having a chance possibly to come back legally at some other time.
Juan, you're right about that, but looking at it in the context of the 1930s, is that repatriation was a cover-up word. Because at that time, which marks the 30s different than today, is that the big source of this expulsion is on the local level. It's in the cities and counties that took upon themselves to say to their communities, there's enough jobs for real Americans if we can get rid of these other people. So L.A. County and other counties throughout the nation then pressured Mexican families to leave, even though Mexicans, for my research, never were a large percentage of those that were on welfare. But it played to the notion or the idea that Mexicans were on welfare. Here in L.A. County, they began to call their actions deportation. And the legal counsel says, no, you can't do that. Only the federal government can do that. And that's where the word repatriation is born, so to speak, to be used in that context to cover it up, to make it look clean, make it look like it's voluntary. But at the same time, you have public raids. At the same time, you have the press talking about unwanted Mexican Americans. All of these actions are very coercive.
Finally, Professor Balderrama, your response to what's happening today and the parallels that you see and the ways you can see avoiding history repeating itself.
Well, obviously, this is a nightmare. Obviously, the legacy of this is in the Mexican community. Even before this happened, I know many senior citizens who would carry around their papers, their documentation, whatever they had, in fear that they might get caught up in a sweep. Now, obviously, those same feelings are being reported daily in the press about people staying home, people even fearful to go out and buy groceries. So that has returned. But what I think marks the difference between the past and today is the simple fact is that we have in the Mexican community different groups, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund and Education Fund, MALDEF, other groups, and more importantly, the different cross-ethnic, progressive groups together, whether they be Japanese American, whether they be Jewish American, the various other groups who have come together and are very conscious of what is happening and is dedicated to those actions of activism and to stop this, what's occurring.
Francisco Balderrama, we want to thank you so much for being with us, Professor of American History and Chicano Studies at California State University, Los Angeles, co-author of Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in the 1930s. We'll link to that book as well as yours, Juan, Harvest of Empire, the whole story that in which you include this as well. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the son of Muhammad Ali and his mother join us. Why were they stopped? American citizens when they came back into this country. Stay with us.
Oh, they tell me
Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Are you a Muslim? Where did you get your name from? Those were the questions posed by immigration officials to the son of the late boxing legend Muhammad Ali earlier this month when he flew into Florida from Jamaica after attending a Black History Month event. When Muhammad ibn Ali said he was a Muslim, authorities reportedly held him and questioned him for over 2 hours. Ali was traveling with his mother, Khalila Camacho Ali, the boxing great's second wife and mother of his 4 oldest children. She was also detained.
The incident occurred on February 7th, days after Trump signed the executive order banning people from 7 majority Muslim countries. For more, we're joined here in New York by Mohammed Ibn Ali and his mother, Khalila Camacho Ali, and their attorney, Chris Mancini. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! You know, I just went to Montego Bay also last week. Really? I flew in back to the United States, and no one asked me about my religion. Muhammad Ali Jr., or Mohammed Ibn Ali, can you tell us what happened to you when you flew in from Montego Bay on February 7th?
Yeah, we was all headed to baggage claim, and immigration pulled me aside and asked me a series of questions. The first question they asked me was, what's my name? The second question was, where did I get my name from? And the third question was, what religion are you? And so I answered, my name is Muhammad Ibn Ali. And I said, I got my name from my mother and father. They raised me. They gave me the names Muhammad Ali from birth. And I said, I'm Muslim. Obviously, I think they didn't believe me, so they took me into another room, the room in the back, and asked me the same series of questions. And so it really struck me as a surprise, shock, and awe because I'm an American citizen. So I don't see why he even stopped me in the first place. But
what did he keep asking you there? What did he keep asking you in the second room?
Oh, they asked me the same questions as he pulled me aside. What's my name? Where did I get my name from? And what was my religion?
And Khalila Camacho Ali, you were both separated, right? Well, you come in together. What happened to you?
We all came in together. We was in wheelchairs because I can't stand on my legs. I don't he either. So it was like I said, we're together. That's my son over there. Keep him here with us because we're in a group. And they just ignored it and rolled him out. And I says, where is he going? Where's you taking my son? He says, he'll meet you on the other side. I didn't understand what was that about. And they said, and then so they told me to go around and go in another room. And I was going, why are they separating us? That's what sent the red flag. Obviously, something was in place. Whether they had a ban going or not, something was already in place for this action. So they asked me the same thing.
What did they ask
your name? He says, well, we know you're Muhammad Ali's wife. Okay. Well, where do you live? And what is your religion? And I said, my religion? Are you kidding me? I said, that's a personal question. I said, is my papers in order? They said, what is your religion? I said, okay, I'll comply. And I said, I'm a Muslim. I totally was freaking out. I go, what's going on? I didn't understand. I says, my papers on. We just want to ask you a few questions, that's all. You know, I mean, they were very kind, but they never said why they asked me a question.
Now, apparently, since then, they have said that they weren't stopping you because of your religion, Mohammed. Do you believe that?
No, because if you didn't stop me because of my religion, why would you ask me what is my religion?
And they didn't explain why they were.
Were you in that room with other people as well, or were you just being questioned by yourself?
There was other people in the room that was being questioned, but I was the only one actually Muslim and black in the room. So,
has this ever happened to you?
This is the first time.
Has this happened?
And I've been to England, Manchester, England, a year ago, and nobody approached me or asked me any question like that.
And Khalila, come on.
Well, I just came back from Paris, France, 2 weeks earlier, but I was alone, and they didn't bother me at all. But when I had my son with me, it totally changed.
And Chris Mancini, your reaction when you were contacted and heard about this, and have you had any exchange with the immigration officials since then?
Well, we're thinking about trying to waive her privacy rights and demanding an explanation from the Customs Service, and B, an apology. But as I'm sitting here, I'm listening to Khalila, I've got to laugh, because Khalila, the difference between what happened to Khalila and Muhammad is partly a difference between their personalities, which should not be a factor whatsoever in the way Customs treats you. But Khalila is not the type of person to suffer fools gladly. When these guys basically, she recognized immediately that they were questioning her about stuff that she is constitutionally protected from having to answer. Muhammad gets dragged back there alone, and they're separated. And it was quite obvious to both of them that this was deliberate. Some people have asked us, well, could this have been a rogue agent who just decided? No, this was two separate agents, actually two separate groups of agents. This was, as far as I can tell, having been a United States prosecutor for almost 10 years, this is the type of thing that Customs Border Patrol does when they want to develop a profile. And we've been getting calls, we've been getting emails from all over the country. And the two things that people are saying, the first one's heartbreaking. Do you think I should deny my religion so that I can get into the country without being hassled? That's heartbreaking. And the other calls we're getting is, you know, I'm a Muslim, and they asked me the same thing, and then they had a list of questions. Where do you pray? What imam do you practice with? What do you read? What religion do you pray 5 times a day? Are you a member of Jarit something or other? I can't remember the exact name. A sect, you know. Blah, blah, and the list goes on and on and on. So I don't care what Customs says. Nobody believes for 1 second that these two people, especially the Alis, could be separated like this, questioned like this, and then it's just an accident. This is not possible.
So we're here with the Alis. Muhammad Ali's father, your father, was born Cassius Clay. Muhammad Ali would later change his name after joining the Nation of Islam. Many news outlets initially refused to use his new name. The debate over his name even extended into the ring. During a famous 1966 interview with Howard Cosell, Muhammad Ali accused challenger Ernie Terrell of being an Uncle Tom for refusing to call him Muhammad Ali.
You continue to be unafraid of this man.
Yeah, I'd like to say something right here. You know, Cassius Clay, yes.
Why do you want to say Cassius Clay when Howard Cosell and everybody is calling you Muhammad Ali? Now, why you got to be the one of all people whose color to keep saying Cassius Clay?
Howard Cosell is not the one who's going to fight you. I am.
You make it really hard on yourself now.
Well,
why don't you keep the thing in the sport angle? Why don't you call me my name, man?
Well, what's your name? You told me your name was Cassius Clay a few years ago.
I never told you my name was Cassius Clay. My name is Muhammad Ali. You just acting just like an old
During that fight, Muhammad Ali repeatedly tormented Ernie Terrell by screaming, "What's my name? What's my name?" I'm wondering, Muhammad ibn Ali, which means Muhammad, son of Ali. Muhammad, what do you think your father would say at the airport in Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, if he were stopped as you were?
I'm a Muslim. That's my religion. My name is no longer Cassius Clay. That's another thing is my religious belief.
And do you know at what point they understood that you were the son of an American icon, of someone who's revered throughout the world?
Well, yeah.
Did you tell them?
Yeah. Yes, I actually told them my father is Muhammad Ali, but it didn't speed up the process. I think it made things a lot worse.
Well, I had pictures of me and Muhammad at the airport because there were travelers asking for autographs, and I said, "See, this is me," and it kind of cooled off, but still, they detained me anyway, and it's just.
Are you planning to sue?
We're planning to take some type of action. I don't know if we're going to sue yet or not, but it's still in the air.
Can I throw in a comment?
Yes, Chris.
First of all, don't you miss Muhammad Ali? Don't you?
I miss him.
But the Alis have become the focus. We're getting calls, as I said, from all forms of Muslim organizations, all forms of support groups. And I believe, although they didn't ask for this fight, they took on the wrong people. And I think they're going to become the focus and a rallying point for this struggle. Now, as far as a lawsuit, we're working towards that. Obviously, we're trying to get everybody who is similarly profiled to contact us or to contact an organization that we can work with. And if anything, Muhammad fought for respect.
That's right.
And so is his wife and his son.
We have to carry on the legacy. We have to help others because other people who are immigrants that have a problem, they don't have a voice, and we have to stand there and be a voice for them.
Just to think about the Muslims, the citizens in the United States, they go make their Hajj, like we have to do every once in a lifetime. You know, it's a practice that we do. And they go make their Hajj, and should they be worried about getting back into the country and to their families?
Well, it cannot be denied the Alis are fighters. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.